Black Collar, oh my god, that's so fucking true. Black Collar said, coming out while the stream freezes reminds me of coming out to the straight cis male friend for them only to talk over me. Jesus Christ. That's... I can only imagine your frustration. Holy shit. Yeah, F's in chat for... F's in chat for fucking Black Collar. That's some shit. God damn. YouTube algorithm freezing out neopronouns. They don't want you to know. I'm bringing you the truth. Jesus fuck. All right, let's try this again. Okay. Hi. So for those that don't know, one of the things that I, as a trans person, am aware of and have some thoughts on are neopronouns. So, what is a neopronoun? These are sort of created pronouns that tend to cover gender in non-traditional ways. Often they tend to be constructions either to be a blend of pronouns or they tend to be their own thing altogether. I'm going to cover some of the ones on this page. I know LGBTA wiki is... There's some things on here that are a little weird. A lot of the articles in here aren't great, but I think this one's not too bad. I've gone through it a couple times. So, here's my thought. I'm going to move the stream over here so it does this. And hopefully, I can keep seeing what I'm doing. All right. So, let's make this shit go away. Boop. Cool. Let's do it. So, neopronouns, by their definition, these sort of ways in which to refer to gender in non-traditional or gender-neutral ways. Now, obviously, a lot of non-binary people use they, them, and those are perfectly acceptable. Those are good. But not everyone feels like a they, them. I am someone that just recently came out as non-binary. I define myself as a non-binary trans femme or trans woman. My pronouns are she, her, faer. And the reason for this is complicated. Essentially, I don't feel like she, her fully encapsulates who I am. There is parts of me that feel really nebulous, and I have a really hard time defining or understanding. And the only thing I can really, like, in some ways connect them to are feelings of, like, sort of old descriptions of the Fae. And I know that sounds super cringe and probably seems like an otherkin thing and whatever, fuck off. But that's the thing. There's something about it. People who used to game with me a lot could probably tell you, like, one of the things I fell in love with for a long time was the game Changeling the Lost, and I think I figured out why is there's a description of the way the Fae are in that game where they feel like this otherworldly or sort of non-traditional idea of an entity, and there's something about that that really resonates. It's resonated for a long time. So yeah, in queer communities, I use fair pronouns among also she, her. Now, people don't have to use those pronouns if they don't feel comfortable or they're not aware of them. Obviously, queer people, if you feel comfortable, great, but they are there. So, here's my argument. I think neopronouns are good. And the reason is that I feel like neopronouns are set up as a way to sort of deconstruct the way we look at gender traditionally. Most notably is that I feel like what we're trying to do with a neopronoun is to understand how gender arises for a person, how gender is experienced by the person, which can be incredibly individualized. Gwen Young said, thank you incredibly. That's incredibly valid, though. Thank you, Gwen. I appreciate that. That means a lot. I get really scared about bringing that stuff up, and stream's definitely a place where I'm not 100% comfortable yet, so yeah. I think these have a use, and the big reasons for this are as such. I feel like one of the things that is really hard is that when we're talking about pronouns, the use of she, her, he, him, they, them are all fine. They're all good. But in a lot of cases, there is a way in which these don't always describe people's experiences, and they don't really wholly, I feel like, give people the knowledge or the experience of who you are. And so when we're looking at these, what I want to kind of point out is this. So, list of neopronouns. So, I actually to refer to gender, a singular gender neutral person over the last 200 years. Let's see here. Thon. Did it freeze again? Damn it. I don't know what some of this nonsense is. Was it brief, though? Okay, because it looks like the stream is holding tight on the page. Oh, there's just going to be these huge gaps. God, that sucks. I'll have to cut them together. That's lame. Sorry, guys. I apologize. I don't know what's going on tonight. Okay, let's get back to this shit. So, long story short, neopronouns I think are valid. The reason I think they're valid is because in a lot of ways, whenever we're talking about gender, we have to acknowledge that gender, if it does exist as a social construct, by definition, it is malleable. It is not always something that is easy to describe, and sometimes we need to create language that's different. If you are coming from the perspective of a... If you're coming from the perspective of a gender abolitionist, I believe neopronouns are something you should back. Holy shit, Gwen Yun, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Fuck yeah. Fuck yeah, I really appreciate that. But yeah, I feel like whenever we're talking about whether it's thon or e or ae, co, v, z, I know is one that I've heard quite often. I know that Luxander uses these. Post records the parts that freeze for the video cutout. I can try. Per as in person. That one's I haven't heard that one before. HU, E, Z, Faer. Tends to be pagan themed. Not really pagan, but you know, it is what it is. But I think that if we're coming from a gender abolitionist perspective, I feel like these are really helpful because what they do is they break people out of the notion that gender is limited. If we're going to make the argument that gender is not connected to biology, which it is not, it is its own thing, then we have to go through and sort of make the argument that there is... We have to make the argument that there is a way in which these help in that regard because they break you out of the normative behavior of referring to people in ways that we tend to often. So for like a really good example, let's say somebody is using ze-zer pronouns. If this person is in some way really frustrated because they get often misgendered and often aren't treated well, as people in their life or their family or whatnot start to learn these, it does start to break up some of these ideas of gender. And I would argue, at least based on my experiences, that when someone starts getting the idea that gender is a little bit more complicated than just boy-girl, what happens is that it tends to have effects on other people. The most notable ones are that I think it has effects on people who are likely to be LGBT themselves. Just like we talk about the idea of representation. Let's see. What does that say? I can't see the full message. Also, from a gender abolitionist perspective, though, doesn't it also create more differentiation? As far as my understanding of gender abolition thought, the idea is to remove the concept of gender. Yeah, and I'll be honest, like, to some degree, I'll get back to my representation argument in a minute, but like to some degree, I would say that like much like we can't just like create communism in the moment, like we can't just force that to be into existence. There's a number of steps we have to take over time. And I'm not saying that always has to be incrementalism, but there's a way in which like you would need to modify the way the world thinks about trade and markets and various other things to put things in a different perspective. And from my perspective, from my idea, is that gender has a similar thing. Let's see, categorization of individuals by gender constructs and allows people to present and live as they are without the boxes of traditional concepts of masculinity and femininity. Yeah, and I'm saying that somewhat, to some degree, neopronouns break people out of that thinking already, and can some degree act as a way to act as one, a form of representation that people can bounce off of and interact with. And to some degree, I would say that like by having those, you kind of throw that away. Let's see what we got, or that you sort of start throwing away this like rigidity around the concept of gender. Let's see who we got. Black collar. Your explanation of neopronouns is super interesting to me. I viewed them as valid before out of a place of reflexive acceptance and not a vague sense of gender being constructed. I love that they can be a tool for changing thoughts on gender. Yeah, right? So like my argument would be is that in order to incept gender abolitionist, that is, gender abolition requires fundamentally changing the idea of it. And I don't know if I fully am a gender abolitionist. I go back and forth on this. But just like we can't just suddenly create socialism, or we can't just suddenly create communism, or we can't suddenly just create the world we want, I don't think we can just banish gender, because it's something that is entrained in us by society, by our parents, by our experiences, by our language, at every normative moment, every communicative moment ever. And it's super fascinating because in my conversation with Luxander the other day, one of the things that I found really fascinating is that when you're trying to describe an aspect of yourself that language doesn't allow for, it's very hard to actually kind of get in touch with that part. This is why Nazis love newspeak, because one of the things that they do is that they tend to, in my experience, they tend to try to limit the amount of language, because to do so means you can't speak to an experience. You can't say you're being abused if you never know what abuse is. You can't say that your gender doesn't really fall into this simple binary if you never know that you can go outside of the binary. Right? Like, that just tracks. And so while I'm not saying that all of these are going to necessarily stick around forever, I do think some of them might be a little bit longer term. Hanging Wednesday said, as an idea of something which breaks the normative concepts by forcing people to consider it outside of the autopilot, I can get behind that, or dig that. Yeah, right? Because here's the thing, like, let me give an example. So think of any interaction you've had today, and you could probably go, if you're a cis person, like, that wasn't particularly gendered. But one of the things you notice as a trans person is even in your basic interactions, the moment you start identifying as a gender other than you're assigned, shit all stands out to you. The way people talk to me when I'm standing in line, the way people look at me or come near me, the way that people sort of behave, all of these things have gender wrapped around them. People are way nicer to me. Seriously, people are way nicer to me now that I'm a woman, because to some degree, there's just sort of this built-in thing that women are to be protected or treated nicely. And I'm fucking 6'1". Right? So I can't imagine that I'm always passing. So like, how... The mask probably helps, but you get my point. Like, this is a thing, and I sort of want to make it clear that whenever we're talking about gender, and if the goal is to break through gender, then having the neopronouns allows for us to be able to better think of and understand the ways in which gender is coded into us and some of the things we don't see. This is especially true with cis people, because you may not be as sensitive to that overall awareness of how things are gendered. And one of the things I can hear from people who use regularly or non-binary and use neopronouns or whatnot, is that they, more than anyone, will notice the way things are gendered, because it's almost in some way stacked against them. As Luxander said in their commentary on ContraPoints' video, The Aesthetic, They noted that one of the reasons why so many people got mad at Contra was because Contra said the quiet part out loud, that essentially by saying that non-binary people can't really fall into performativity theory, right? One of the major theories for why and how gender works. Because non-binary people can't fall into performativity theory, they by definition can never pass. And a lot of people took this as her somehow being a transmed, but it's literally performativity theory. It's literally on the other side of the spectrum as far as arguments. But it's not just about like sort of defending Contra on that particular point. It's more pointing out the fact that, again, as Luxander so brilliantly fucking noted, they said the quiet part out loud. They pointed out and showed how this is really problematic, because to some degree, whenever we're talking about transness, there are still people that argue that non-binary people are a separate entity from trans people. Now, that's just utterly nonsensical. There's trans-binary, there's trans-non-binary. There doesn't need... The idea that there's any separation there is nonsensical. It's something just created as a way for transmeds to be able to separate them out. But this is the thing that I think is really important. Now, obviously, I can't trust necessarily all the stuff on here. I don't know if everything is 100% solid. But I can say that, like, if I'm looking for a way... If I'm looking for a way in queer circles to describe this other part of me, this thing about me that I couldn't get at through spirituality, right? Years of Zen, years of fucking paganism and 1,000 other fucking religions. Something I couldn't get to that didn't make any sense. Like, these things help, at least for me, right? And so, like, this is one of those things where I think it's super, super difficult to kind of, like, rock in a lot of ways, because this stuff is so complicated and is only super noticeable when you are exposed to it in a different or a newer way. Let's see. Hanging Wednesday said, I think that is true of people who are aware of gender as a thing in awareness. Being aware of hegemonic masculinity, you can see it everywhere, though I could see that being heightened for trans folks. I think that's actually pretty comparable. I would agree wholeheartedly. I think when you're starting to get the idea that there is such a thing as I think there's something really there that is important to recognize. When you're somebody who is a sort of, you know, woke cis male person, if you're trying to break the habits of masculinity, especially hegemonic or toxic masculinity, then doesn't it stand to reason, by all rights, that you're going to start noticing the way that shit is everywhere? The way that men behave, the way that they're sort of in your grill or in your space, or the way in which, like, you know, I remember in one of my groups of friends, like, there was this whole thing of watching, you know, our male friends talk to girls, and the entire theme of it was, you know, by the end it was like, want some dick. Like, that's what the joke was, right? Like, want some dick? Like, because the thing is that the way the gendered interaction was structured, it was basically just guys trying to get it in. And don't get me wrong, back when I identified as male, I did that too, poorly. But again, I do think that's super true. There's a way that you notice that stuff when you're a cis man who's trying to break those toxic masculine habits. You see them in yourself, you see them in others. With trans people, it goes the next step further, because I think that what we do is we start to notice the ways that gendered interaction sort of plagues everything. It sort of affects everything, for good or for ill. And I think that this is a really big deal. I think it's a really big deal to be aware of, and I think it's something to take in, because I think we should normalize the use of neopronouns. Now, I don't know if that means all of them. I don't know if that means that we should, like, have a vote. I tend to be very freeform. So my thought is that as long as you can tell me how to pronounce it, because I'm a dumb white American, I would deeply appreciate it. I super would appreciate it. Like, for the years I called a Puerto Rican gentleman on Facebook Raul when it was Raul, because I'm an idiot. Like, I suck at pronunciation. English was not my strong suit, and I'm neurodiverse, so fuck it. If you can explain to me how it works, if you can give me a way to understand, I want to be supportive in that regard. And as somebody who now identifies as non-binary, like obviously in my work life and my other life, it's going to be a trans woman because that's what most people are going to understand. But in my personal life or my queer life, no, this is kind of a thing that's online right now. It's something I've really been debating for a while, and I've been trying to figure out how comfortable I am because I've had previous issues with being there's ways in which you get to you sort of like, when you start to take on this perspective, you start to be able to think of gender in much more creative ways. And this is where I kind of come down to it. One of the major arguments that gets thrown against people who have neopronouns is this really kind of shitty idea that, can I turn this? Okay, that made it a little better. Fuck me. Like, one of the major issues with this idea is that for me, if gender is a social construct and it is a constructed form of meaning, right, then by definition it can be malleable, it can be changed, it can be broken, it can be reconstructed. We do this with constructs all the time. And so my thought is that if these allow people to feel more included and understood, more understood, excuse me, I feel like this is worth it. Because, again, I always come down to this. I am going to be inclusive unless I see a reason not to be. And what I mean by that is not just because I'm uncomfortable with a thing or because I don't fully understand it. More likely, I'm going to not be inclusive because there's probably some way in which the thing we're being talked about is problematic, right? Super straight is not a fucking thing. But I think neopronouns have a value, not just for the purposes of making the people who use them feel included, but I also think they have a very incredibly strong use in breaking apart our ways of looking at gender. Let's see, Hanging Wednesday said, there is a benefit from being able to see it from more than one perspective or position for trans folks. You get to see the shift. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can imagine for people that know me, one of the things is watching me change is probably fucking weird. Right? My voice is changing. My hair is here and changing. I mean, some people probably know me long enough that they saw me with long hair previously, but like, it's kind of fucking different. I don't dress the same. I have tits now. Like, these are things. So yeah, I just think this is really important to recognize, and I want to be validating and supportive to non-binary people. I feel very protective of them. My partner's non-binary. My child is non-binary. And hell, I got to have a conversation with one of my favorite non-binary YouTubers, Luxander, the other day, over the show BoJack Horseman. We'll be posting that conversation after their video comes out. But I feel like this is something that's important. I think if somebody feels like this is something that really meets them, I really like it. Black Collar said, I agree at Hanging Wednesday. I'd add hegemonic cis normativity to hegemonic masculinity. Hanging Wednesday said yes, though I would think that the hegemonic cis normativity is something even larger than hegemonic masculinity. I agree. I agree with both of you. Yes, I think there's a larger thing there and a larger argument to make. Excuse me. But I do think that there's ways in which that sort of cis normativity and hegemonic notion does feed into hegemonic masculinity. I think there's a lot of ways those things can interact, and I don't want to get into them tonight because I think that's like a fucking... I think that's incredibly complicated, and I almost want to have a conversation with someone over that. Black Collar said, I'm officially on board with neopronouns is valuable. Though they wrote neon pronouns, which I almost want to see those too. Neon pronouns sound neat. So yeah, my pronouns are she, her, faer for the queer community. If you're cis, you know, or you're somebody who's not really part of the LGBT, then you know, I don't mind she, her. So it's she, her, faer in the queer community, and yeah, go from there. So yeah, I hope this makes sense. I hope this is something that makes sense to you, because I feel like this is really important. One of the big things right now is that we're just coming back from a last, was it 3 or 4 years of non-binary people being like fucking attacked online. I talked about in previous videos, you know, the Calvin Gara stuff. I feel like these things, you're fine, Black Collar. It was really cute. You're good. I know what you meant. But yeah, like I think these things really matter. I do, and I want to protect the non-binary people in my life. I want to connect with people and see see if there's ways that we can make things more inclusive. I don't think we should be looking at ways to make gender more understandable to cis people, because in a lot of ways, a lot of cis het people tend to, there tends to be a lot of sort of legwork we have to do to kind of explain things. And my feeling on the matter is that, like, if there is a more traditional pronoun that works better in cis het spaces, then maybe try using that. One of the things I say to my clients sometimes, this is a fun one. So I've got quite a few non-binary clients, or have had them in the past, and one of the things that's really interesting is I'll say this to all of them. If you're going to be misgendered, which you are, how do you want to be misgendered? And the reason I ask that is, unless they're truly androgynous or truly, like, you know, agender or bigender, then often non-binary people have a leaning. Sometimes it's masc, sometimes it's femme. If that's the case, where do you want to go with that? Because to some degree, we owe, like we said earlier with the Luxander argument, non-binary people can't pass. There's not a way to do that. And so I think this is really good stuff. So I appreciate you sticking with me through all all the issues, including me just hitting my mic. God damn. But yeah, so I really appreciate it. I hope you guys, this helped. If you like the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to support the stream, you can do so by donating at Streamlabs. That'll be down in the link. And if you want to support the channel even further than just a simple one-time donation, you can also do Patreon. So yeah, I think it's really great. Yeah. Yeah, so neopronouns are valid. Moving on.